property from the old Highway 6, which is North Railroad Avenue now, all the way to the Bible.
And that was your mother's
My mother's sister.
sister.
And when I was a little bitty kid, I used to love to go over there because they had a grocery store too after they quit farming. And she'd always give me cookies. And boy, and I used to love to have my mother visit her sister because I could eat a lot of cookies.
And they had their grocery store in Galveston
On
too?
Galveston, on 43rd. One of my uncles had it in 41st and G, and the other one had it in 43rd and H.
There were lots of corner grocery stores.
Yeah. See, and back in them days, they had a lot of corner grocery stores.
Yeah.
But now you don't have many corner grocery stores. You just got them big
Yeah.
stores where you need a little wheelchair with an engine on it to go shopping.
Yeah.
In 1947, you mentioned about the explosion.
Yeah.
What was
On that
you doing
particular
then?
day of the explosion, I was working in San Leon, building a shrimp conveyor for some fishing company. And when the blast went off, it blew the doors off of the building. We didn't know what had happened, but I had a Jeep that I was driving that had a built-on welding machine. And I just told him that, I said, well, I'm going back to Galveston. But me, like a darn fool, I didn't go to Galveston. I come down the highway and I went into Texas City because I knew that my wife's family lived in Texas City. And she was working at American Oil then. So when I went to Texas City, the first thing I did, I went to my father-in-law's house. And there was blood all over the house, and there was every window and doors was blown out of the house. And I was pretty well concerned about it. So I started driving. I got into Texas City before they even started putting up roadblocks
Where was their house located?
on 5th Avenue North.
Fifth Avenue in what 100 block?
Well, it was on 5th Street, right behind where the Showboat Theater was.
Okay.
It was about 4 or 5 blocks from Bay Street.
So you probably total about 10 blocks away from where the blast was.
Yeah, pretty
Or
close.
so.
Yeah, I imagine so, within 10 blocks. So then I started driving around Texas City, and I finally spotted my wife in a car with some other people that were coming from American Oil. And I stopped, went on and put my wife on top of this welding machine that had there, and I brought her back to Hitchcock. But then two of my wife's aunts and uncles had quite a bit of damage. So for about 2 or 3 months, they all lived in the house with us here in Hitchcock because they didn't have no place to live in Texas City. But I was really happy and thanking God that they were still living after I seen all this blood and everything where my mother-in-law and father-in-law lived. He worked for a refinery, my father-in-law did, but my mother-in-law was just a lady that stayed at home, you know, and she was cut up a little bit, but not very bad shape. She didn't have to go to the hospital or anything like that. But she did have, my wife did have one of her uncles get killed. He was the fire chief in Texas City. His name was Henry Baumgartner. He got killed. And another guy that was married to one of her cousins, his name was Warren Mays. He was a photographer. And he was in a plane flying over the blast after the first blast, taking pictures when the second blast went off, and it blew the plane completely into pieces, and they never did find the plane or his body of my wife's cousin or the pilot that was driving the little plane over there while he was taking pictures. His name was Warren Mays, but they never did find his body or the plane. And then she had another cousin that was working somewhere around there that had one of his right leg blown completely off. He lives in Santa Fe now, but he's only got that one leg, an artificial leg. He still gets around.
What was Mary Agnes's maiden name?
Polar. Mary Agnes Polar. But her mother's name was, before she married, was Baumgarten, and that was the uncle that was killed. Henry Baumgarten was fire chief in Texas for the city of Texas City.
Mm. That was it.
Really, all the firemen in Texas City, it was a volunteer fire department, I believe.
Yes, it was a volunteer.
They were all
All of
killed.
them got killed.
So they had this, they stayed over here with y'all. Did they rebuild their house where it was in Texas?
No, my mother and my father-in-law's house was completely destroyed. They finally bought another house, I think on 18th Avenue or 17th Avenue in Texas City. And the McCauley's, which was one of my wife's uncle, their house was around 19th or 20th Street, pretty further away from the blast, and they was able to repair it and live there until they both passed away.
Well, that was something. You know, I know what I wanted to ask you a while ago about the farming. You didn't have tractors and stuff like that.
They had 2 mules, that's all
You
my
had
dad
mules.
had.
And their names? I know all the mules had names.
They all did, but I can't remember these mules' names.
None of them named Jack?
I'll always remember, though, that they had a big barn, and they had different compartments in the barn. One part of the barn is where my mother raised chickens. The other one's where my dad fed the mules. The other one was where he kept all of his seed and feed and stuff. And then another place was where he stacked all the hay to feed the mules. And in 1947, I believe it was, when we had a hurricane, the old barn was leaning, and we stayed here at home. And my mother looked out the back porch and she says, "You see how God works? That old barn is straight now. God straightened it up."
The wind, the hurricane.
About the time she was telling me that God straightened up the barn, God also floored the barn, because the wind leveled the barn to the ground. So I had to get who it was that I had. I got to build me this barn that's still standing now, that I kept my cows in, my dad's mules and stuff like that. But he always, he truck farmed. It was just walking behind the mules.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question about that. Everybody in Hitchcock, before we had banks, they used to say that the folks kept their monies in coffee cans buried in the chicken yard. Is there any truth to that?
That's a lot of truth to that. My mother and dad, I don't think ever had a banking account in them early years. They dealt everything in cash. If they had the money, they'd buy it. If they didn't have the money, they'd wait till they get the money before they bought it. But one of these uncles that was my mother's brother, he had a grocery store, and he would always come to Hitchcock because he used to love to go dove hunting. And he'd go out south to go dove hunting, but he'd always bring a big basket full of groceries, almost a week or two supply, every time he'd come to Hitchcock. So they didn't have to spend very much to buy groceries because my uncle just supplied them with groceries. But I remember one thing that my mother told me. When I first got my job, I used to give my mother all the money that I made, with the exception of $3, and that's money that I needed to go to picture shows. And we never would date a girl when we was young because we loved to play ball. And if we didn't date somebody to take them to a show, we could go to 2 shows for the price of 1.
Take a day.
And that's what I always remember about Freddie and I. We'd always go. There was 3 or 4. There was a Queen, a Key, and another one.
John, did you go to Galveston?
The fee was 15 cents to go to a picture show. But when I got ready in 1952 to build that house. I told my mother, I said, well, I'm gonna have to borrow some money now, because we've got a daughter, and we've got a son on the way, and we're gonna have to. At that time, when I was living in the old house, my mother and dad had moved to Galveston. My mother was helping my sister raise her son, and my daddy was working for my brother in some kind of business that my brother had in Galveston. I don't remember what it was, but he had it somewhere around 42nd or 43rd and G.
This was Hitchcock job?
Yeah.
Okay.
And she says, where are you going to borrow the money? Where are you going to get the money? She said, well, I got to go to the bank and borrow it. She said, well, they'll charge you interest. And I says, yeah, I know it. She said, well, just a minute. She says, come with me a minute. So I went with her, and we had a chicken house that we raised chickens and turkeys just for our own use. And she had me to pull up a couple boards off of the chicken floor. And then she said, now get the hoe. And I got the hoe, and she wanted me to scratch on the dirt. And I felt something. It was a can, a lunch kit can that the kids used to take their lunch to school whenever their mother made them a lunch to take to school. And I don't know if it's honor to say this or what, but when I opened that can, it was full of money, cash money. And it was around $5,600 that my mother had in that metal can buried underneath the chicken house floor. Because at that time we didn't have a bank, and they wouldn't go all the way to Galveston to put money in the bank in Galveston. But she says, this will help you to start to build your house. It was $5,600, and I still got that can.
Do you?
I still got the can.
I'll be
Oh,
there.
that's nice.
This lunch kit, I still got it in my pump house.
So you moved it from the chicken house to your pump house? Your can?
Yeah, my can. But I took the money out and spent the money.
So do you think that this was not uncommon for folks in Hitchcock in
No,
those
I
days?
really don't believe so.
to have their
I think
cash?
back in them days, everything, they didn't write checks. They didn't know what a check was. It was strictly cash. That people bought everything when they had the money. If they didn't have the money, they didn't buy anything.
So your mom had accumulated $5,600.
$5,600 of all the money that I gave ever since I got out of high school
Oh.
and was working, because I would cash the check if I was paid in the check by the company. I worked for Todd Drydock, and I'd bring the money home, and I says, here, Mom, this is your money. And I turned it in, except $3. I kept $3 from my spending money.
Boy,
But she had it in that can. I just couldn't get over that anybody would put. Well, actually, I don't think she actually knew how much money was in there, because he just kept putting it in there.
This must be a big can. One of these days we need to have that on film.
No, it's just a regular can, a lunch kit. The little metal lunch kits that we used to have when we went to school.
Well, if that's the case, the lunch kit could be worth more than the $5,600 that was in there.
Yeah.
Those are collectibles nowadays.
Yeah, I guess so.
Those are collectibles. Watch Channel 8, the Antiques channel.
People lived a really different type of life. And it's really changing. It's going to be changing with our children, our grandkids. Different type of life, how they are going to be living whenever they get out of high school and college and get them a job, and that type of, how they'd be spending money and stuff like that.
They don't even see money now.
No.
It's all
That's right.
electronic.
Electronically transferred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it really, I don't think they realize how hard it is to come by, or how easy it is to spend.
Yeah.
Or it's easier for them to spend.
There's one thing I remembered also, is that way back there, if you still go down 2nd Street, you will still see old rotted down railroad tire that I had on each side of the gate that you walk from the street to the old house. That when I was a little kid, we used to get our milk from Tom Kimlin, who had that milk dairy right across the street, a little further down, front where I've got my house built now. And I still got a couple of these milk bottles that he used to always would put that fresh bottle of milk on top of that railroad tire that I've got where the gate was. And that's where I would go out there to get that quart of milk early in the morning to put in my coffee when I drank coffee in the morning. Drank milk or something like that. But I still got a couple of them glass quart
Well-
containers.
Yeah.
Mr. Kimley's house is about where
Neil Connor's.
Neil Connor's home
Yeah,
is.
where Neil Connor's home was. And then Warren Kimlin is there where Frank Edwards is living now. That's where Warren Kimlin